Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be with you. Welcome to Meet Touchstone Essentials Live Training Edition. We're going to talk about metabolic syndrome and supporting healthy blood sugar tonight. And we've got Cindy Clement with us. How you doing, Cindy?
Good. You just went to Disneyland. We just went to Disney World, the game. So yeah.
It's the time for Disney, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I love how you change this picture every time.
I know, because I got to get one with my white hair. I can't have that brown in there anymore. And folks, after this presentation, there's somebody in this picture in the front row that does have metabolic syndrome. And after this presentation tonight, Craig, they're going to know who it is. They're going to be able to right out. So
we're looking forward to that. Well, you all know Cindy. Cindy is an acclaimed speaker, published author, nutritionist, herbalist, adjunct professor, and passionate about empowering audiences to live as vitally as they can in our toxin-ridden world. She's written a book, Your Body's Environmental Chemical Burden. It's won all kinds of awards, so make sure that you pay attention to that. But Cindy, we appreciate you being here and taking the time to put this information together. We'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Craig, and hello, everybody. And as Craig mentioned, we are going to do a webinar on something called metabolic syndrome. And I want you to know that metabolic syndrome is not a disease in and of itself. What it is it's actually multifactorial, and it encompasses things like genetics, nutritional deficiencies, metabolic defects, such as insulin and glucose, but also it includes lifestyle and environmental risk factors. And so what I call it MET-S, metabolic syndrome, MET-S refers to what we call a cluster of these risk factors that we'll talk about tonight. And these risk factors, when there are three or more of them, they're very specific leading toward cardiovascular disease as well as diabetes. So it's not a disease itself. It's just this cluster of these risk factors. And most people who have metabolic syndrome also have something called insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance, it's characterized by a decreased responsiveness to the tissue of circulating levels of insulin. It's actually considered to be the major contributor to this metabolic syndrome. So I'm going to demonstrate with my hands, but if someone's healthy and doesn't have MET-S or insulin resistant, what happens is they eat carbohydrates in a meal, even if it's a high carbohydrate meal. And when that happens, the pancreas releases insulin. Now, insulin is the key that unlocks the cells so that the insulin can get into that cell. And we need that insulin to deliver that glucose to our cells. Our body runs on glucose. Our brain needs glucose. Our muscles need glucose. So what insulin resistance is, I want you to think about it this way, that the cells become stiffened for a number of reasons. They become stiffened on the outside of the cell. Now, we eat that same carbohydrate meal, even if it's a cupcake, a high carbohydrate meal, good or bad, and the pancreas releases that insulin. But now the insulin can't get into the cell. The cell is insulin resistant, and therefore the glucose can't get in. And if the glucose can't get in, it's stored as fat, and that really creates problems. So the symptoms of insulin resistance would be high blood sugar following a high carbohydrate meal, but this overstimulation of the pancreatic beta cells that produce that insulin. And eventually, like I said, the pancreas is going to become unable to produce that insulin to maintain that normal glucose level. And then we really run into a lot of trouble. Now, metabolic syndrome was actually coined, the term was coined in the 1980s, but it's had a number of different names. It's been referred to as something called Syndrome X. It's been been just called prediabetes. It's been called dysmetabolic syndrome. It's been called cardiometabolic syndrome, as well as this insulin resistance. But again, the body is supposed to make insulin to move glucose into the cells so our bodies can use it for energy. But obesity makes it more difficult for the cells to respond to insulin. So if the body can't make enough insulin to override that resistance, the blood sugar continues to increase, and that's when people start to develop this type 2 diabetes. So what I want you to understand are what we call that constellation of risk factors. And what are they? Well, first, it's elevated fasting glucose. So even when you're fasting and you haven't had that high carbohydrate meal, your glucose levels remain high. And then, of course, we have dyslipidemia. And all that means is that your cholesterol is all out of whack. Your good cholesterol is too low, the LDL is too high, and the triglycerides are too high. But also, hypertension plays a part in this constellation of factors. And we actually, we use 130 over 85. Anything around there starts to also become a risk factor. In addition, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome in women and then low testosterone in men also play a part in this, as does what we call central adiposity. And this is where we have this central obesity going on. And how we measure that, by the way, is a waist circumference of over 40 inches in men and a waist circumference over 35 inches in women. And those are also very defining criteria for this metabolic syndrome. So really, it's the presence of three or more of these risk factors that actually defines this metabolic syndrome. So as I mentioned, it was discovered in the 1980s, but what we know now is that the prevalence of metabolic syndrome is reaching epidemic proportions. We've got nearly 35% of all the adults in the United States have this particular issue with their blood sugars. And when you get to ages 60 or over, they're saying 50% of the adults have this insulin resistance. It affects women slightly more than men, but 18% of those aged 20 to 39. So this has really become something of epidemic proportions. The highest prevalence of metabolic syndrome is observed in Hispanics as well as Native Americans. So their bodies just don't do well with carbohydrates, highly refined carbohydrates at all. So sure, genetics and inflammation, a poor diet, they're all precursors to MET-S, but environmental toxicant exposure is as well. And so, for instance, BPA, which is primarily found in our food and beverage containers, and then when we eat them or drink out of them, it gets the BPA into our body. This BPA has been found to have an association with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. It's been used commercially since 1957, and they know that about 90% of United States residents, all the way from children, infants, and children to aged adults, 90% or more have BPA detected in their urine today. So we are bombarded with BPA. And based on these experimental studies, BPA tends to affect our endocrine glands, our hormone glands. And of course, insulin is a hormone. So BPA tends to affect our glucose metabolism as well. There are other pollutants such as air pollution or our traffic-related pollution. They too have been implicated in insulin resistance and an increased risk of mortality. But we also have those persistent organic pollutants called POPs, if you will, and they play a major role in the development of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Now, remember, those POPs, as we call them, they're a class of compounds that have the ability to persist in the environment. So persistent organic pollutants. And what happens is they biomagnify in the food chain. So let's say that, we've got fish in the water that are eating some of the algae that contain this BPA, because it's in our waterways, and the fish eat it, and then larger animals eat the fish, and then we eat the larger animals. So it biomagnifies in the food chain. And seafood is a major source in our diet of these persistent organic pollutants. Now, because POPs they're called lipophilic, which means that they're attracted to fat. These substances get into our body and they're really highly resistant to degradation. And they have an estimated half-life of 7 to 10 years. Now, remember, the half-life is the amount of time it takes for half of that substance to degrade. So 7 to 10 years, that's the half. So really, we need to do detoxification on a daily basis. And I know that you all know that by now. Now, according to a 2017 report that the Centers for Disease Control published, the higher concentrations of pesticides and herbicides are associated with an increased prevalence of type 2 diabetes. So we really do have a problem with so many of these chemicals. We also have arsenic that's responsible for an increase in metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. And the primary sources of arsenic, of course, are our drinking water, animal products, as well as grains. In fact, rice has very high amounts of arsenic in them. Now, the investigators that have looked at all of this, they suggest that about 8% of our public water systems in the United States exceed the EPA's standards for arsenic in drinking water. So there's just a number of different toxicants that get into our body that they too then, along with genetics and inflammation and diet, also increase our risk of developing metabolic syndrome. Now, again, although this is multifactorial, lifestyle factors have a profound effect on blood glucose homeostasis or balance in the body. Now, according to statistics, at least 92%, I'm going to say that again, 92% of type 2 diabetes cases are related to lifestyle choices. And that's why we call type 2 diabetes a lifestyle disease. And what it means is there's a lack of exercise, there's that central weight gain, that fat, a diet that's high in carbohydrates and saturated fats, as well as low in fiber. And all of those are the key lifestyle characteristics that are associated with metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. Now, I call that a lifestyle disease. But here's the good news. The good news is that researchers in the diabetes prevention program, they compared lifestyle modification with diet and medication in more than 3,000 patients that were pre-diabetic. And after 3 years' time and follow-up, the metformin prescription group showed 31% fewer diabetes. But the lifestyle modification group showed a 58% fewer diabetes, fewer participants with diabetes. So exercise and weight loss and a healthy diet are the key lifestyle interventions, and you can reduce insulin reverse insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes if they haven't gone that far. So we really want to focus on that. And one of the big ones is exercise. And we are told that if you are at an appropriate weight level, 30 minutes most days of the week is just fine. However, if you need to lose weight, it's more like an hour a day on most days of the week. And of course, when we have that extra weight around the middle, most of the time it's called visceral fat. And visceral fat is a type of fat that wraps around our internal organs. So when we've got that central adiposity, so what happens is that visceral fat puts us at even a higher risk. Excessive food consumption, especially those foods with what we call a high glycemic index. And they are really key contributors to the development of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. So the glycemic rating system, what they do is they take all carbohydrates, as far as anything from, xylitol, which has a 0 glycemic index, all the way up to like watermelon, which is, I think, about 100 or so. And what it does, the index, it shows how quickly each food affects the blood sugar level when it's eaten on its own. So for example, and you can look this up, there are multiple charts on the internet. You can just say glycemic index chart or something. If it has a rating of 55 or less, that's a great food. That will never mess with your blood sugar or your insulin. So 55. If it's 56 to 69, we call that a medium risk food. And that's something, you can eat once in a while. But if the rating, if the GI rating, the glycemic index rating is 70 or more, those are really bad foods that we should avoid as much as possible. So just for an example, as we've mentioned before, not all carbohydrates are created equal. So think about legumes, think about pea protein. That has a glycemic index of 24. Remember, I said 55, anything below 55 or below is good. Legumes are 24, an apple is 36. But mashed potatoes have a glycemic index of 90. So you can see that foods and the way they're prepared, they all can affect the way our bodies respond health-wise. So again, the good news is increased visceral fat studies have reported that even a small percentage of weight loss, anywhere from 6 to 10%, can significantly improve insulin resistance and then reduce that risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So we've got exercise, we've got weight management, we've got a plant-based diet with low glycemic index, but we also have stress management. And what stress management does is it lowers both the cortisol level and the blood pressure. It improves our immune system and it helps reduce anxiety and depression. So relaxation techniques are really valuable because they promote the stabilization of the adrenal gland and of the pancreas, of their functioning. And of course, as we always say practically every week, the plant diets have demonstrated effectiveness in our health, not only in our body weight or in our glucose or insulin control, as well as our cardiovascular risk factors, but plant diets are useful in the prevention of this metabolic syndrome. So once again, these plant-based diets always seem to be best for our body. And I'm not telling you have to be a strict vegetarian or a vegan. It's just limiting those animal foods as much as possible. It's good for your body. It's good for our planet as well. So what I want to do now is I want to look at some of those really powerful plant foods that are very helpful for us. And we'll start with blueberries. Blueberries have demonstrated to have incredible health benefits. They are one of the highest antioxidant foods on our planet, but they also help improve our cognition, so good for our brains. They have shown reduced cardiovascular disease as well as reducing cancer risk. So preliminary research is suggesting that the antioxidants in blueberries help with that balancing of glucose and insulin in our bodies. And they did this. And this is the gold standard for studies, but it's called a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial. So even the people that are conducting the trial don't know which group the subjects are in. So this is the gold standard. And what they found is that by consuming the equivalent of 2 cups, that's a lot, of fresh blueberries every day, that in and of itself helped to improve insulin resistance in individuals. So consuming blueberries have been shown to reduce our blood pressure, reduce that LDL cholesterol in people already with metabolic syndrome. So we want our blueberries. We also want milk thistle. And this is considered an important plant or herb in the treatment of liver disorders, but it also appears to be really beneficial in maintaining that normal glucose and insulin levels in our body, as well as our fat metabolism. So they've done a lot of clinical trials. And by the way, silymarin is the active component in the milk thistle, much like curcumin is the active in turmeric. So we've got these active components. Well, the silymarin has been shown to act as an insulin sensitizer. So remember when I said the cells become insulin resistant? Milk thistle, the silymarin in that becomes more of a sensitizer. So now that insulin is able to get back in again. It makes that cell more sensitive instead of resistant to that insulin. Now, green tea helps us to maintain a better body composition. Green tea is great for not just energy in the body, but also for weight management, I'll say. But it also increases thermogenesis, which again is fat burning. But it's been shown, green tea has been shown to improve our glutathione activity in the body. And this is important because glutathione, which is determined to be the master antioxidant in the body, which is made in our liver, but glutathione is involved in the detoxification of all types of toxicants. It facilitates excretion from our cells. It facilitates excretion of toxicants from our body, and it directly neutralizes chemicals. So we want that green tea, we want our milk thistle, we want our blueberries, but we also need that fiber. And fiber is that vital component in the treatment plan of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, because fiber helps to reduce our blood pressure. It helps to manage our cholesterol levels in a positive way, but it also modifies inflammation in the body. And when you take fiber in the foods you're eating, or if you're using it as a supplement before a meal or with a meal, it's been shown to improve the glucose levels and increase, again, that insulin sensitivity, to make the cell more sensitive and receptive to that insulin after a meal. Now, soluble fiber is the type of fiber that's frequently found in oats and legumes and all kinds of fruits and vegetables. And when your body breaks down that soluble fiber, it lowers the glycemic index of the other foods that you are eating and digesting. So having a good amount of fiber can actually offset some of the fun things you might want to eat once in a while. So you're probably wondering, well, where do I get all these good nutrients? Well, of course, blueberries are found in super green juice and in essentials. Milk thistle is in super green juice. Green tea is in super green juice. Fiber is in super green juice. And we've got, let's see what else. We've got blueberries and green tea are in essentials. We've got Boost Focus Fuel has green tea. Green Energy has green tea, green tea in it. So we've got all different ways that we can supplement these extremely important nutrients, on a daily basis and help our bodies maintain that glucose and insulin, as well as our weight in weight management. But there are also other nutrients that are really important that we want to also include in our diet. And one of them is alpha lipoic acid. And this is, again, a very potent antioxidant, and it's considered one of the important nutrients in the treatment of metabolic syndrome. When it comes to folate, which is a B vitamin, of course, research has shown that with a combination of risk factors, comes this reduced folate level. So we want to make sure that we're getting more of these B complex foods, more folate, more vitamin B12. In fact, vitamin B12 helps to improve what we call that endothelial function. And remember, the endothelium is a thin membrane that lines the inside of our hollow organs, lines the inside of our heart, lines the inside of our intestines, of our blood vessels. So to keep that endothelial tissue healthy is extremely important. When it comes to vitamin C, they know that individuals with metabolic syndrome have significantly lower levels of this nutrient. And again, it's when you don't have enough vitamin C, believe it or not, it's associated with a greater resistance to fat loss. The vitamin D, when you have MET-S or a metabolic syndrome, the visceral fat in the body reduces the absorption of your vitamin D. So there are a number of different things that can either be depleted or we create more of a need of when our glucose and insulin isn't functioning properly. Of course, vitamin E has liver protective effects, which is important because oftentimes with metabolic syndrome, after a prolonged period of time, these people tend to develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we've got some vitamin E for that. We've got magnesium, which is associated with when you have lower levels of magnesium, that increases your risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And chromium itself has been found to improve that insulin sensitivity once again with the cells. And the studies they did was with women that had polycystic ovarian syndrome. So again, where are we going to find all of these wonderful nutrients? Well, there they are. They're in your products. The W is Wellspring. You can see that SGJ is super green juice, E essentials, OSP organic super protein, SGD super greens plus D. I'm sure you've got the codes by now. So these are the helpful nutrients that we need. And these are an easy way to get these nutrients on a daily basis, just by, mixing things up, drinking them, and taking the supplements. It really, really couldn't be easier. And I'm so excited about the quality of the foods that go into Touchstone's products. I mean, I look at how careful they are. They're really picky about their foods, about organics and things like that. And the way they've developed these products, I really do congratulate them on the effort they've put into these products to help support our health in just so many ways. I mean, every month we go through these products and and now this product does this, and now this product can help with that. So they're really, really important to use on a daily basis. But by now, we all know that large amounts of sugar is definitely toxic to our bodies. And what happens again is that glucose spike happens when we have that sudden rapid rise in blood glucose levels after we eat a lot of sugar. And then our bodies release more insulin to take away that glucose, and they usually store it in those fat cells. But then over time, what happens is that weight starts to creep up. And it's partly due to that constant hunger of that dip and dive of that glucose, but also because of the high levels of that circulating insulin that can't get into the cells. And then things get stuck. And then we get into that fat storing mode, and we can't get into the fat burning mode. So thankfully, there are natural ways that we can flatten that glucose curve and help reduce those spikes, such as eating fiber before a meal, or changing the order of what you eat, or adding a few minutes of movement after your meals, but also by getting a little more control with something called glucocontrol. And glucocontrol is one of Touchstone Essentials' new breakthrough products that helps to support healthy blood sugar levels. And all you do is just take 1 or 2 capsules with a glass of water about an hour or so before the meal. And this can help to reduce excess glucose by 50% or more. And then when you have that flattened glucose curve, You're less likely to be hungry after a meal and more likely to have fewer cravings for sweets, and you'll have more energy to boot. So again, with those glucose spikes, there's this constant hunger, constant craving that make it feel like your eating habits and your energy and your health are just like out of control. So glucose control can help to take back that control. Early product users that were, working with this product before it was released, they've reported that they're feeling full longer, that they have reduced cravings for sweets, that they're not as inclined to be snacking all the time or in between meals, that they have more energy, and that, yes, their waistlines are shrinking. Glucose control contains an exclusive natural glucose control complex. And what's in there that you probably can't see are plant-based enzymes that target excess glucose from the foods that we eat to help flatten that curve. But glucose control also has 3 specific probiotics, which is great news, because there was a study done in 2016 and it was published in what we call Science Direct. And it showed that probiotic consumption significantly changed fasting glucose, as well as significantly decreased insulin resistance. And so the study concluded that by consuming probiotics, you can help to improve your glucose management. And they found the greatest effect of it after 8 weeks of use, of daily use, but it had to have multiple species of probiotics. So here we have not only the enzymes, but we've got the products, the probiotics as well. I also want to mention a couple of the other ingredients in that proprietary blend. So we have acacia gum, which helps with the glycemic response of the foods and drinks by lowering that peak glucose response. We also have chaga mushroom, which has been shown to reduce inflammation, lower blood sugar, and lower cholesterol. We have reishi mushroom in there that not only helps to boost your immune system and give you more energy, but its other benefits include decreasing blood sugar, increasing the good HDL cholesterol, and decreasing those triglycerides. So when we're using enzymes and probiotics and mushrooms and prebiotic fibers, that's really going to help with those constellation of symptoms that are found in MET-S. And again, it's going to help us as well by aiding our weight management, and supporting cardiovascular health, and then balancing that glucose and insulin. But we also have to, again, just quickly revisit detoxification, because we know these toxicants can exacerbate metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, as well as being stored in the fat in our body. Because even in very small amounts, these toxins can, when they're stored in the fat, they make it really hard to lose weight. They can mess with our memory and our clarity. They can interfere with our immune system. They can disrupt our hormone or endocrine system. They can affect our energy levels and make us more fatigued. These toxicants can make it harder to fall asleep. They can cause poor sleep quality. So this zeolite detox pack is really going to help to remove the heavy metals and toxins, help to support our immune system, balance the body's pH, support natural energy processes in the body, as well as support a healthy digestion. Because and we've got the fulvic minerals as well. So all together, this is going to help to really detoxify. And I know this has been a lot of information tonight. So what I want to do is I want to recap. We need to exercise. If you're at a healthy weight, 30 minutes a day. And if you want to chop it up in 10 minutes at a time, go for it. It doesn't have to be all in one fell swoop. Go ahead and do it 5 minutes, 6 times a day. It doesn't matter. If you're at a level where you need to lose a little weight, it's 60 minutes a day. do it in 10-minute increments and just do it 6 times a day, or just get it all over within an hour. But we also need to maintain that healthy body weight, because we know that that central adiposity is going to affect our risk of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistant. We also want to make sure that we get more of this organic plant-based diet. We want to manage our glucose. And we can take a look at the glycemic index. We can reduce our stress. We can detoxify. And then we have to take our supplements on a daily basis and help provide those nutrients that we don't necessarily consume on a daily basis. So, folks, that concludes our presentation for tonight. I'm excited to announce that on July 13th, we're going to be doing a webinar on dysbiosis. And what dysbiosis is it refers to an imbalance of the microbial species in our gut. And what it means is there's too much of the bad and not enough of the good. And when your body is in dysbiosis, your health can decline. So we're going to learn all about that. So I hope you tune in. Back to you, Craig.
Awesome. Cindy, thank you so much. What incredible information. And I love this new glucose control product.
It looks pretty good.
I love how you tied detox in with the glucose control. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's fantastic information. Thank you again. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time, July 13th, right?
Yeah.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you soon. Good night. Good night. Bye-bye.